Good morning. Welcome to the Passive House conference hosted here in our hometown of Boston. My name is Zeina Talje. I'm with C Capital Investments, and I'm joined by my colleague and friend, Travis Anderson, architect and currently working with the city of Boston. We're here to share with you a little bit about our experiencing putting together 52 Fisher Ave, an awesome 6-unit passive house development in the Mission Hill area of Boston. And we're going to just walk you through our story, getting this project done. So to tell you a little bit about myself, my name is Zeina Talje and I'm with Z Capital Investments. Z Capital is my own shop. I started it about 6 years ago. Our focus is really to bring buildings that serve the community and have a human scale. This is probably a adverse reaction to my career throughout on very large commercial high-rise development, but it was also a tremendous learning opportunity for me because throughout my career, there's been that sustainability thread, and it started with wanting to build the first LEED Gold office tower in San Francisco that you're seeing here in the right, to more recently when I struck out on my own to see if we can really achieve passive house on a pretty modest 6-unit in Boston. And we'll walk you through that journey. Next slide. It wouldn't have been possible without Travis Anderson, our architect for the project, and Travis will say a few words about himself.
Thanks, Anna. Great to be with everybody this morning. I'm Travis Anderson. I'm the Senior Infrastructure and Energy Planner at the Boston Planning and Development Agency, where I run the Boston Smart Utilities program, which is quite different from my previous life, you could say, where I was the in-house certified passive house consultant at a company called Place Taylor. That's a development, construction, and architecture firm. And, you know, I was really fortunate to have Zeina bring myself and Place Taylor on board through this adventure, and it was wonderful working with her throughout the project.
Well, thanks, Travis. And really, Travis and I are part of a bigger team that worked quite hard to pull off 52 Fisher Ave and went through some drama, such as a pandemic. It really wouldn't have been possible without some of the planners we worked with, one of them here on this picture, John Feuerbach. This site was a City of Boston site that was disposed through a public bid process. And really no one wanted to build it, but of course I did. And Travis was like, yeah, we've done harder sites than this. And we had a tremendous team that came in every step of the way and helped solve problems. Roberto Iannetti was our passive house certifier. And during the pandemic, he would just review details with us. And we would do quick sketches to figure out how to mitigate a thermal bridge. There was a lot of lessons here, things that we would always tell people and everybody we trained not to do that we ended up doing, but it was really life, forcing us to think on our feet and step in. Next slide, please. At the same time, I'd say the most important people behind this project was the construction crew, and the gentleman in the middle, Manny Reynoso, really exemplified what it meant to be committed to high performance and quality construction. He also had to deal with his own challenges as the city of Boston shut down construction and he had to furlough his crew. But the crew was so adamant to protect the building, and we had framed the building, and the building had an envelope, an enclosure, but the roof wasn't on yet. So you could see they're waving from the roof, and this is a picture as the inspector was coming in and saying, you guys, you got to go home. They put sheathing on the roof, they put the roof on and made sure to protect the building for that 6 to 8 week construction shutdown that we experienced. Next slide. We want to walk you through the location here. 52 Fisher is located in the Mission Hill area of Boston, which is really walking distance to so many important neighborhoods, including downtown Boston. It's also, 1 or 2 T stops away. It's also very close to the Longwood Medical area, where most of Boston's hospitals and research is concentrated. And it's an area that historically has been known to house a lot of the student population. So when the city of Boston went out to find a developer to develop this, there really was very strong demand from the community to build ownership units because they wanted people who would invest and raise their kids and be part of that fabric and not just transient renters. It's a market that's sensitive to pricing. So in Boston, building anything and selling in the market in the five with a number that's in the 500,000 is unheard of. So our commitment was to cater to first-time home buyers anywhere between the high 500 to the mid $700,000 per unit. And I don't know if you're shocked by these numbers, but housing in Boston is one of the top 3 most expensive places to buy homes in the country. Next slide. The plan was to build 6 condos with parking on site. We looked at the best siting for the site, and Travis will walk you through more of that detail. We were looking to preserve home ownership and make this building robust so that it really cost nothing to maintain and to live in moving forward, because we knew that we would end up possibly setting some of the highest numbers in terms of the sale pricing per square foot because of the quality that we had set out to build. Next slide. Quick discussion on sort of how we come and figure out if a project is viable. We really have to understand who is our demographic. We're very close to the hospitals. We figured it would be some of the healthcare and essential workers. We're close to a student population. Sometimes grad students spend 10 years in college. They become first-time home buyers. And we knew that we had to market this community as very much a home ownership community because most of the investment had been rental housing. And we had a strong story pre-pandemic in Boston. The average days that a condo listing was on the market was 31. So we went in feeling very strongly about this. Next slide. I'm handing it over to Travis to actually walk you through a lot more of the design overview, and then Travis will turn it back to me once he finishes building 52 Fisher.
Great, thanks, Zeina. So as many of you know in this forum, Passive House is a really wonderful environment to live in, and helps reduce energy bills. It's quiet, resilient, and actually in this case, quite marketable. And this project in particular was helping to align with a lot of the principles set forth in Climate Ready Boston, meeting 2030 decarbonization goals, as well as some of the new standards that came into existence through the Mayor's Office of Housing for zero emission buildings. So this was kind of a mix of many layers. Not only were we looking to satisfy a housing need, but also we're looking to help continue this kind of decarbonization effort throughout the city through this one little project and have it kind of spread and hopefully manifest into more and more projects down the line, kind of a teaching opportunity. And one thing that we wanted to consider first was just kind of the urban context or the urban fabric throughout the neighborhood. Most of Mission Hill is kind of this very traditional triple-decker style that you see throughout New England. And we wanted to sort of mix this in what we call contextual modernism, where we take some of the context of remaining elements, where it's either building height or window placement or proportions, and try to kind of weave that in, but have it be a more modern building. And in this case, a building that really speaks to being a passive house. So you can see that the volumes were quite simple. They're really just basic rectangles, which lends itself very well to good, consistent surface to volume ratios important to passive house. And we also looked at ways to help, streamline and make efficient egress and stair cores. So this kind of center block that you see is the main stair that kind of connects these two side volumes together. And we're also dealing with a very difficult site. So you can see we're kind of wedged in this very steep hill, where this building on the left, actually its basement probably is about a 16-foot high ceiling in a basement, which is quite rare on the front end, and then it just goes down to nothing in the back. So we're dealing with pretty extreme grades. We actually had a really difficult time even getting a geotech out to the site Zeina had to do quite the ballet dance to get a geotech involved and have them really tell us what was in the ground. And then how do we place that and have it kind of fit and work well within the environment that it lands. And then, as Zeina mentioned, we're trying to get from certification during a pandemic. And we're really looking at all the issues that arose throughout this whole process. We did set out to do a passive house building from the start, but there are certain things that just come up through the process that we'll talk about. And we're very much learning steps for all the team, including myself, as this was, a continuation of many passive house projects that we've done in the past, but they're always different and you always learn something new along the way. So I just wanted to orient everyone to the building, just kind of walk you through some simple floor plans. So Fisher is right here. This is kind of the main street on the top of the page. And we had really a big goal of Zeina and for the neighborhood was to have off-street parking. This is a huge issue throughout the city of Boston. It's usually one of the major things gets flagged in a community presentation. So really we kind of set out and did a number of parking studies and how we could kind of get parking onto this crazy steep hill site. So you can see here we have 4 spaces on a parking deck right at the main building level here. You would enter into the first ground floor unit, which is a 2-bedroom ADA ready unit. And then we have this central stair core that leads you up through the building. And then also another egress stair in the back of the building. This is due in large part just because of the site constraints again, and we had to figure out ways to get people in and out of the building. Moving up to floors 2 and 3, these are really just stacked floor plates. So we again have the 2-bedroom here on the left side, and then we start pulling in the mix of the 3-bedroom unit. One thing that we were doing with the Mayor's Office of Housing as well was working with them through floor plan design, elevation design. And they were really talking about having us orient the views in different ways. So the 2-bedroom unit really looks out toward a really kind of lush park across from Fisher Ave. And then the 3-bedroom unit looks out kind of towards the back of this building. So we can take advantage of this kind of like that kind of gap between the triple deckers on either side and have it look at the rolling hills out to the blue hills and really kind of nice dramatic views. And then moving up to the top floor, we have the penthouse suite, which again is a 3-bedroom, slightly different floor plan configuration. We integrated, fortunately, sort of this office area, which unknowingly at the time became pretty important during the pandemic for work from home situations. And then we also provided this really nice roof deck to take advantage of both sides. So they get to look out to the park here and then also the rolling hills back the other way. And then throughout this, it's all about these tricky transitions, right? So again, we're dealing with a steep site. We simplified the volumes so that we could handle them quite well, but then we had to go from concrete to steel to accommodate that parking deck, from the steel up to kind of this kind of large, wide flange array, and then we're shifting to the stick frame building on top. So how do we get the thermal breaks? How do we get the air tightness? How do we kind of weave all these layers together and have it meet passive house? So one of the things that we learned was you really need a creative structural engineer in the beginning. On this project, I'm not going to say the engineer was not creative, but I would say they weren't really up to the measure or standard that we wanted them to be. So it actually got really, we had to really work through a lot of this detailing on site. And fortunately with Manny and MCR Construction and his team, we had, this really great ongoing dialogue with the GC to kind of figure out how does all this kind of, nest of details kind of come together and suit our needs. In late 2019, we broke ground. So it was great. It's always exciting to see a hole start to go in the ground and actually see the formwork and concrete go in. Really exciting moments during the construction process. And then we kind of get back into this sort of weaving in the thermal breaks throughout the site, having the foundation step, working on site and being right there when Manny and his crew are doing all the formwork and talking through the rebar details, talking through the thermal break details of that stair core in the back and the CMU block. And then we get shut down. COVID hits and we take a pause, as Zeina mentioned. I don't know if you want to speak to a little bit of this kind of transition period now.
Yeah.
Zeina?
Yeah, I mean, this is really was something that I think no one plans for. As I shared with you, ZCAP was my shop and I started it with all these good intentions, but I didn't plan for a shutdown. Travis, did you plan for a furlough event in your career?
No, I did not.
So we really, it only solidified our commitment to having quality buildings because we couldn't tell from my perspective as the investor and the person with the financial obligations, I couldn't figure out whether we were going to have a success or a failure. But of course, I think it solidified that the team had come together to build a wonderful building that we knew was a quality building. And I'll share with you a little bit more sort of how some of those passive house features, given the impact the pandemic had on health, became key aspects of our marketing pitch. But I'll bring it over to you, Travis, again now.
Great. So while I'm at home with the little one, as she is not in school, and we're kind of dealing with all the fun stuff early in the pandemic that everyone probably would like to forget, the job site continued. So they got back out on site. We had the steel going up. A colleague actually took on doing some of the CA, which was wonderful. And she really kind of stepped in and helped the project moving forward from an architectural standpoint. And we just kept going on. And then finally I come back and we kind of reached this head scratching moment where we have this big steel array, but we're engaging with PHI, Rigoberto, who's in Italy, and he's running all the therm modeling. And we discover, of course, with all these wide flange beams, we have bridging issues that we needed to mitigate. And, again, fortunately, we had the help of MCR with Zeina, and we all kind of got on site, put our heads together, and came up with a way to really kind of think about a cost-effective and feasible way to mitigate these bridging. Also, keep in mind, this is all of a sudden when supply chains started to erupt. So we had to really think about a simple way to get there and what was the best cost-effective and timely way to resolve this. So we looked at adding closed cell insulation that you can see on the wide flange. And then Manny and his team actually came up with the idea of just sort of wrapping this in a very elegant way using steel framing, and then we would case that with cement board siding. It ended up being quite a nice detail in the end, and I think it really kind of helps enhance the building, but it's one of those things that kind of, just caught us. And, as we're kind of working through the pandemic, this was a challenging moment for the team, but a collaboration really came through.
Travis, can I also just say a word about it? We were very lucky that even though we hadn't planned the proper thermal breaks with our steel structure, Roberto Iannetti with PHI was willing to bring his experience with thermal bridging and model these details and tell us, you know what, you probably won't get a full passive house certification, but you're still a low energy building because there's so many great elements of your project. And he would constantly cheer us on, like, it's still an amazing building. And I was really surprised to see the willingness to work with us and sort of this true understanding that it takes a lot to get to that passive house standard. And that even though we may have fallen slightly short of being fully passive house, because we are a low E building, it really is a building that with, had circumstances been slightly different, probably would have met that. And it's still a very, very strong project. But I just kind of, I think for anyone thinking or on the fence, especially sometimes I find folks asking me as a developer, why did you do passive house? And I think it does matter to set that commitment because you still reduce energy significantly. Back to you.
Thanks, Anna. And so we got the steel resolved and we just kept going up and up. We started integrating the WRB, the weather resistant barrier. In this case, we're using the SIGA system. Manny and his crew were well-versed in using more traditional Tyvek, and they, thought this building wrap was a great way to sort of transition over. So they kind of just put this up in the same way they typically would a typical Tyvek system. And we also had the reps come out, show them the proper layering, taping techniques. And, we were constantly going back to the site and helping strategize how to kind of weave this membrane in and out around the volumes of the building. I think Manny had me on speed dial. I'd probably talk to him about 10 to 15 times a day. This was not your typical RFI architect project process where we'd be submitted something, a PDF, and then we'd respond. It was more of like a quick phone call. Hey, can you run up to the site? I have something to show you, which was great because I'm used to kind of working like that from my own design build background. And again, we're just kind of looking at all these transitions, where the windows sit in the plane, what happens when a steel bollard gets in the way, what happens when the wind comes and tears through the site and rips part of the membrane off when not a lot of people are around, just because of the COVID situations. And then, going back and working with them to put on the rain screen and applying it there, having them work directly with the siding crew to kind of find all these little nicks, because each little hole adds up over the volume at the surface of the building. And they did a great job of kind of their on-site QA, QC through that process. The siding guys did in conjunction with MCR. And then we kind of end up with this kind of nice, simple, elegant resolve to the building. Moving to the inside, also working with PHI, we worked on different vapor control strategies and used the Certainty membrane system. Again, this was sort of a supply chain and cost issue. We looked at a few other materials for this, and the Certainty kind of really fit the bill in terms of its vapor performance and what we needed for the wall section. And then, Manny and his guys also did another great job of kind of taping in all the outlets, taping to the floor, and really making sure this was consistent, as you can see here in these photos. And then moving on to the ERV, another element that we had to work directly with a sub who was installing the system for the first time. So Zender was great in coming down and kind of talking through how all these pipes should actually kind of get cleaned up and kind of flow through the building in a nice way, coming off the manifold. We love neat and tidy designs. So, kind of see here how it really kind of goes from this sort of octopus arms, and then they kind of get it all straightened out and make it much more efficient. Efficient runs means the systems work better, means we have better air quality inside, and as a passive house consultant, and I'm sure there's many engineers on this forum that, love a nice, neat and tidy mechanical closet, which Manny and his crew did a great job. They actually installed the system while they're still in kind of rough interior framing, put in a nice custom pan on the floor for the water heater, and really preserve this space in a really nice way. And then again, we're kind of back to it as the subs play through. We do more of this on-site QA, QC. We start to find some holes starting to appear where, maybe the sub wasn't really informed or didn't really know at the time that we needed to really make sure that this was a nice airtight and well-kept space, but we went back and fixed it. Also, someone came through and cut away our tape at the foundation. We found that, went back and fixed it. We also came up with a good way to do a closed cell application under the building, not only for a little extra belt and suspenders in terms of airtightness, but also to get that added R value that we want in the building. And lo and behold, through all this, we hit our mark in terms of what we wanted to achieve in terms of airtightness for the targets we were going for. But we also learned that it's really hard to compartmentalize a building, especially at this size, because it's small and compact. We have small units. On the inside, you're chasing down 1 inch by 1 inch holes throughout the building, which are really hard to find, especially with a more of a green crew. And even though they took all that extra measure in making sure the vapor barrier was well taped and well seamed, we still had gaps that we just couldn't find. So that's one of the reasons, yet another reason why we kind of went for the low energy target through PHI. And then we're finally there. We're at dense pack time, and where the building really starts to kind of resolve itself and come to life. We're starting to wrap those thermal bridges with drywall. and hardy board that'll soon get painted, and really kind of pulling the building together. So what we ended up with was a great building. Again, as Zeina mentioned, we went for the low energy standard, and the two targets that we missed on was the net ACH overall, and the heating demand overall. And that's kind of where it's a great that PHI actually developed this low energy building standard, because this is an amazing building. It still is below the threshold for your energy UI requirements. But had they not created this new framework for us to go to, we wouldn't have been able to certify and have this building be recognized nationally as really a great building for the climate in general. So really, it's just two marks that we missed, and I'd say that's pretty darn good when we're building in the midst of a pandemic and all the other gray hairs that we got along the way. And
Travis, do you want to speak for a minute about how we hit the low energy standard for the city of Boston? Because there's not really an agreement on the energy standards. I guess we hit net zero based on the city of Boston definition.
Right. So the zero emission building standards that were put in place through the Mayor's Office of Housing, they follow a lot more of a bit more of the FIAS metrics in terms of what you need to achieve. In this case, the building actually unknowingly became one of the first zero emission buildings through the Mayor's Office of Housing, just because of when it finished out. So the zero emission building standards were released, and then I'd say probably like maybe 4 to 6 months later, this building was actually complete, and it's one of the first ones that conformed. So, we were looking at, it's a slightly different metric where you're looking at a carbon per person, and that's measured off the EUI of the project offsite. And since Zeina actually was able to put photovoltaic array on the building, we were able to drive those energy loads down. We had a thermal bridge free building for the most part. We had a building that actually achieves the heating demand that we're seeking, even though in this case it was above what PHI required. It met the city standards, and we have a nice airtight, resilient envelope. So it's actually really exciting to see this kind of fall into that category when we weren't even really going for that, which is pretty exciting.
Thank you so much, Travis. And here we are. Travis and team did an incredible job delivering the most beautiful building, really incredible views from inside the units, high quality. But here we are. It's coronavirus time, and the city is shut down, and we're delivering this building kind of the winter of last year. We're finishing up in January. We start marketing 2 months before completion, which was targeted for March or April. We recover from a 3 months kind of period of construction shutdown. We deal with all sorts of procurement issues. Windows were coming from Italy, and we're a bit delayed, but they actually made it. So it's almost like a miracle that this thing got built. And we're wondering, who can we call for inspections? And most of the city staff is working remote. We look around and you can park anywhere. There's no parking issues anymore because people have left the city. So we're, in the midst of a pandemic, and no one really gave us a memo about it or told us what we're supposed to do. Next slide, Travis. And I want to take you quickly here through how quickly the market can shift. And this is important because as much as buildings, as hard as you can work on a building, it tends to be difficult to deliver a project typically in less than 5 years. And a lot of things can happen in 5 years. If you look at Boston, as I shared with you earlier, pre-pandemic, 31 days was the average time a condo sat on the market, and you couldn't find inventory. As we went through the pandemic, we had a flight out of the city, out of Suffolk County, and that was very well documented. Essentially, anyone who's working stopped going into the office and was working remote, and the student population was remote. A lot of the dormitories shut down. I mean, it was incredible how instant that shift was. And all of a sudden, we had a boom in the suburbs. There was a flight out of the city to find your single family home where you didn't have to go down an elevator with your neighbor, and you could protect yourself from getting COVID. This was a great time for anyone who wanted to buy, because There probably was more inventory than Boston had seen in a long time, but this was also a very short-lived period. I mean, I'd say it was between 9 months to a year. And if you're thinking about it and you're not sure you're in it, which is often the case of how the market cycles happen, is when you're going through it, you really don't know that it's a cycle because you don't know when it's going to start or stop. So as we were marketing 52 Fisher, and the building spoke for itself, really the units turned out stunning. The design that Travis had done and his team, and the thoughtfulness about orienting the units to face the park on one side and then to face the Blue Hills was phenomenal, and the elevation of that site. So as we came out of the pandemic in March of last year, and the city started to loosen its dining and other rules for public engagement, we did notice a big difference, and people started to come out and look at our units. We went from having one person show up at an open house in January to having 6 or 7. And all of a sudden, once we got that momentum, things really took a turn, and the first unit went under agreement. And I'll share with you our marketing campaign in the next slide. But once the first unit went under agreement, they all followed within, I'd say, 60 days, which was really remarkable. And if you're thinking of moving to Boston now, I'll just kind of tell you where we're at right now. I put that under post-pandemic, and now I'm thinking that probably we're not done with the pandemic yet. So maybe it's sort of, as the market emerges, we're seeing a housing boom here in Boston. There's a complete lack of supply because all of the shutdowns and COVID has impacted projects getting approved, finding crews to build, et cetera. Procurement. Inflation has resulted in a 30% increase in the construction index for both labor and materials. And the biotech investment that Boston has seen, thanks to companies like Moderna figuring out the vaccine, the mRNA, has resulted in sort of unprecedented flow of capital into the biotech sector, which means a lot of new biotech buildings coming to Boston, and a lot of that construction labor going to do biotech, which really is a very lucrative place to be. There's a 40,000 jobs projected to come to Boston, which means they'll all need housing. So Boston's a great place to live. It's exciting, but as you can see, our 6th unit resulted in all those challenges. So this gives you an idea of why it does take a long time to get to those housing standards and needs that we're facing here in Boston. Next slide, Travis. So as we put together this incredible project, we knew that we couldn't go to the market and talk to them about it the way we're talking to you, because they really couldn't relate to an energy model or blower door test. So, and what we had to do is work with our brokers who were going out and selling these units, so that this was not just a building that delivered housing, but it was a building that educated buyers about why they're paying for this and what it means to live in it. So if you think about an ERV and what you do when you clean the air in your unit, it means that you're really breathing better. So our taglines became, breathe better. Once you build a double stud wall and stuff it with dense pack, like Travis shared with you, then you're going to have almost no noise coming to your unit. And the triple glazed windows, Travis spec, amazing. And so you're going to sleep better. And the units were planned to be 2 and 3 bedroom units. So once you're working from home and you need an office, and we in general had young people living in the building, young professionals, you're going to have that office space and you're going to work better. And all of this, taking care of the environment and being sustainable and reducing your carbon footprint early on in your life, you're just going to live better. And so it was really nice to have all of these evolve out of true meaning and very much demonstrated effort that went into the project. Next slide. And the team that marketed the building was a group of young and energetic brokers who really took it upon themselves to learn this. And sometimes Travis would have to go and explain, no, this doesn't, ERV doesn't, dehumidify, that's different. But I think we got a lot of education out, and that was something, frankly, that as you see people come back and ask you thoughtful questions and track their utility bills, that we did get an audience of building energy geeks like us. And it's just nice that we were able to find them and pull them out. Next slide. What was one of the really fun aspects of doing this was our Instagram campaign. I don't know if you've bought a condo, but it seems everything was on Insta the last few years, and I kind of brushed up my Insta skills. We had one video reel of the ERV singing Every Breath You Take by the Police. It was just a really fun, jazzy campaign that got people excited about, everything from solar arrays to ERVs. And so I'm really proud of the fact that we were able to bring a little bit of fun into it. Next slide, Travis. We didn't talk much about the solar, but as Travis shared with you, I had wanted to try and make solar work for this project because it was important to me that we took care of people and offered them the best value. And one thing I noticed was that the cost of a commercial solar system was significantly less than a residential system. Don't ask me why. And I thought as the developer who was making the financial decisions, I could pull it off. My hopes had been that we would recover a lot of these costs through some of the tax credits. Unfortunately, despite advice from my accountants, that was not the case, but I'm still really happy that we did it and integrated. And there's a lot of lessons on how to do the solar integration into buildings that will carry with us into future projects. Next slide. I did want to share with you some of the final marketing photos that we had. We staged the units. The units were really more stunning than I expected. And Travis is just going to flip through the slides. Here you're looking at the penthouse unit Travis mentioned that had views of the Blue Hills and the park on one side. And this unit actually made the Sunday Boston Globe Home of the Week. And all of a sudden I was seeing headlines where Mission Hill never had before about how the most desirable area to live in Boston is Mission Hill. And I assure you that when we started a few years ago, that was not the headline you would hear. And it was just a moment for me to be very proud that even though, as Travis mentioned, it was a 6-unit project, it really did have an impact where it elevated the reputation of a community and it brought a standard that I think anyone would want to see in any neighborhood. And that's our story. We'll leave you with a few nice shots, interior shots, and open it up to questions. Thanks so much for your time. Travis, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, just wrapping up, it's always great to see these projects really come to life and know that there are people that live in them and own them and take care of them and appreciate them, and that we're really helping to build a better future through better housing, especially as we continue to address the issues of climate change and how that's such a complicated puzzle to solve. And we're just kind of really doing it one building at a time, which is not a bad thing, but we're also making an impression to the greater good, which I think is really important. Now that I've transitioned to doing work at the City of Boston, still kind of carry these principles through, in planning for a better city, which is really, really important thing.
Thanks so much, Travis, and we'll open it up to questions. Thanks for spending time with us today.
All right. Hello, everyone. And thank you, Zeina and Travis, for that incredible presentation on a fantastic project. I'm Sean Torbert here on behalf of the New Jersey chapter of the Passive House Network, and I'll be the moderator for the questions. So if anybody has any questions, please put them in the chat. And I guess I'm going to start with, being building this during the pandemic, and then also having contractors who may not have had any previous experience with Passive House or Passive House training, like the certified Passive House tradesperson class. Can you talk about what that was like? How do you train contractors during a pandemic, who've maybe never done this before? And I guess that's to both Zeina and Travis, whoever wants to take that.
I'll just start, but I have to say, we were very lucky to have Travis be our main guy. Travis was the person who brought the Passive House experience and had several projects under his belt. But we also have a fantastic contractor who was there ready to learn and who wanted to deliver the best building possible. And when you have that mindset, whether you're following passive house or another standard or code, you're just there to do a great job. So this was a pretty special team of people who were humble, who showed up, who didn't pretend they knew something, they didn't ask questions. I think we really couldn't have achieved what we did, Sean, as you point out, during the pandemic, if it wasn't for that openness and that mindset. So I really have to say this can be done if you come into it with the right attitude and with the humbleness, and willingness to learn. So it's really all about the team. They made it happen, especially our contractor. I'll let Travis talk more maybe about how we work through some of the issues there if he'd like to.
Yeah, sure. So Manny and his crew actually had done a couple Energy Star rated projects, and they also had a lot of prior experience with affordable housing. And he just had a great, well-trained staff. A lot of folks had been with him for 15 to 20 years, so they were really seasoned carpenters and were able to pick up on assemblies quite quickly. He also did a lot with a program called Youth Build, so he would bring in some younger apprentice carpenters and give them on-site opportunities as well. And just from my previous experience when I was formerly at Place Taylor, which was a design build company, we did a lot of that on-site training as well. So it was really just having a good feedback relationship with your general contractor, working with the carpenters on site, listening to their insights, because sometimes these guys in the field, they can just sketch a little detail on a piece of 2x4 pretty quickly, and it actually make a lot of sense, and we just verify it and move forward. So I think it's having a lot of trust amongst the team was really helpful. There wasn't a lot of sort of the typical conflict that sometimes comes up in a lot of projects, especially between the different camps. And so we were really integrated in a great positive way, which I think was, why the project became so successful.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I think, that's really, a testament to the importance of, collaborative design, right, from the beginning, and getting the right partners to do it. So really happy to hear that, you were fortunate enough to find contractors willing to learn, right, in this sort of, new age of construction and energy efficiency, and, codes changing almost daily, it seems like. So fantastic. You had brought up, there was a lot of questions here about the building envelope assembly, in particular, the insulation, location of air barriers, right, stuff like that. And you'd mentioned that you kind of had to pivot due to some of the supply chain issues that we've been facing during the pandemic. And I think anybody who's involved in this industry understands that we have to be a lot more adaptable now, depending on what's available for the construction timeline. So I'm just curious what that was like to go for maybe, something a little more traditional with exterior insulation to then going to the double stud wall with the dense packed cellulose. And what was that like? Did you have to remodel everything, right? What was that process like? Because I think, we're all learning very quickly how to make substitutions quickly and still maintain the proper performance. So can you just, shed some light on that process?
Yeah, we were pretty fortunate that we had a double stud wall in the project from the beginning. We did early on explore exterior insulation, and just through some costing exercises with MCR, the double stud actually made more sense. There is an understanding that there's a lot of debate around double stud walls in the passive house world, and vapor permeability, the hygrothermal properties, all that fun stuff. But we did work through that with Rigoberto to verify that everything was on the up and up in terms of long-term performance and resiliency. That's why we had the interior, kind of really well done interior vapor barrier or vapor retarder included, and we also used the Sigma vest on the outside in conjunction with CDX, which has a pretty good perm rating in general. And they also did some tricks where they would gap the sheathing, with little nails, and make sure that it had a way to sort of breathe out and take advantage of that air barrier. So there's all these little tricks that we kind of put into play. But yeah, we were fortunate, given supply chain issues, that we did have a system that was readily available. And we weren't relying on rock wool or any of the exterior insulation. Polyiso also became a huge lag through the, I think it wasn't particularly for this project, but during that period, it also was really hard to acquire. So we were pretty fortunate.
I might just add a quick note. So we had ordered windows from Italy, and as supply chain started to get interrupted, I feel we're the only people who got our windows on time. The timing for us was such that we were about 70% bought by the time the pandemic hit. And again, it goes back to a good contractor that is going out on the market and grabbing stuff for us so that we could keep working. And the city of Boston mandated, was it a 12-week shutdown or 10? I don't recall, but the day after the shutdown was lifted, we restarted construction. There's nothing worse than sitting on a half-built building in terms of the financial viability or the morale of the team. So, but we really, again, it was when you build a team that's talking to each other and trying to get to a same objective or finish line, you really get there because these are all just good things to build into your project, regardless of whether you're certified passive house or something else. So a lot of it is, again, kind of the passive house concept could be a unifying effort, right? If you think about it, and something that can keep people a little bit more on their toes because they're trying to do something quite hard. So I kind of see it that way as well. But we were lucky that, honestly, I mean, even appliances, we pre-bought the appliances based on what was available because the market was also running out of appliances. You know, finishes, we substituted a couple finishes here and there, you know, stone that was available. And we were just kind of very aggressive about buying whatever we could find, get our hands on.
I think Zeina and I went to the tile shop at least a half dozen times to make sure that things were in stock and things could, you know, come in when we needed them. So
great, thank you. So we did have a question. Are you able to share what brand windows that you used from Italy?
They were Schuco. They came from EAS, which is a local supplier here.
Oh, great. Okay. And let's see, I'm scrolling through. We have a bunch of questions coming in. While I'm looking through these, I was curious about, you know, dealing with the brokers and, you know, how were they able to effectively communicate, you know, all the benefits of passive house? You know, you had mentioned the acoustical benefits and quietness. Question came in about, you know, indoor air quality. You know, I know there's been a lot of studies done on, you know, whether it's a school or residential developments in Europe and the UK or Scandinavia and the UK that, you know, says passive house has, you know, the best indoor air quality of any building. But I'm just curious, you know, how did the brokers, you know, pitch this to customers?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, passive house is really a lot of things that in the end you can't see, but you can experience them. And after years of being involved in the green building movement, whether it was LEED or other platforms, I've learned that we need to demonstrate that this effort that goes into a building and a project can be talked about after you're done. And it does take 6 months to a year to get the passive house plaque. And usually when you're selling condos, you don't have that. But I mean, even that doesn't really convey the story. So we tried to translate a lot of these concepts that are built into the passive house system, whether it's, you know, air tightness or ventilation, into things that people could relate to. So if you look at the website, 52futureave.com, it was about breathe better, live better, sleep better, because these are what the studies out of Harvard say about good ventilation. And good ventilation happens when you are filtering the air. So you really try and use very simple English words to describe what you do with the passive house approach. And it doesn't matter if you say passive house. What matters is that people understand how much care went into this home for them, you know, for the future. And I think we had a great team of young brokers who were able to capture a lot of that on social media, because even how we sell homes is changing, and it's a lot of Instagram. So I think I talked about one short video clip where we had the ERV singing, you know, every breath you take. And it was just so, we started to have a lot of fun with it. And once we relaxed, you know, everybody was enjoying learning about it. But it, you know, but of course it took a lot of education, a lot of sitting explaining that, and a lot of people kind of sometimes don't say the right thing, but I had to give them, and Travis too, we'd have a talk about what we didn't want to say, and they did these stickers where they labeled different things, but I felt they had nailed the pitch by the time we were done, and they showed up and did the open houses. So there was a little bit of a learning curve, but it was done, with enthusiasm and the right attitude, because we had, I think, again, the right team.
Great. Yeah. And so would it be fair to say that, in order to sell it to the public at large, you really focused on, the air quality, the comfort, the quietness, right? I know we tend to get so micro focused on the energy efficiency and the thermal bridge details, right? But it's the end user, right? That's really getting all the benefits, and the energy efficiency is almost, a side benefit to the. I'm just curious. Did that come into it at all? Yeah.
Thank you, Sean, for asking me to address that. You can't represent to folks that they're going to be at 10 or 15 or 20% of their utility bill, because you really can't sell that. And I kind of actually didn't want people to say, you're going to use 80% less energy, because it's true concern on representation, and there's a lot of flood loads that we can't account for. But I'm happy to say, based on the utility bills that folks are getting now, they see it. And we did install solar, and solar was kind of the visual energy piece of it that helped people realize, wow, I'm buying, it's not market standard anyway to offer solar as part of a base building package. And to me, that was kind of a demonstration of, we've put the time, the money, the effort, the knowledge, and we also integrated a solar array, and that's going to offset most. But you can't say you're going to come in here and live, and that's tricky. It's a bit of a challenge. Yeah.
Yeah. The occupant behavior, something we can't model for, right? Good. So that's actually a good lead into, we had a question from Hank Keating. He had actually a couple of questions, one about mass timber, but I think Travis answered that already. So he's actually asking if you could describe the solar system arrangements a little bit more in the commercial versus residential benefits to residents. And then I'll add on to that. I'm not sure what's happening in Boston, but, is there potential to, expand further for community type of solar, to go beyond just the building?
I'm going to feel like a portion of this, because I think the answer is going to come mostly from Travis on community solar and all that, because he's the head of infrastructure in the city of Boston. For us, our decision to put a solar array was because as a commercial development, it was significantly less cost than to install solar as part of the base building. However, as a commercial developer, it was not a benefit to us and our bottom line, but we did it because of concern. This was a demonstration project of what can you do to really, and to show folks that if you commit, then there are buyers out there who will pay a bit of a premium to get that, move-in ready, almost carbon neutral, day one living. And I believe in that market. So this was really a bit of a decision where I was a bit in front of myself to say, you can't sell people, a space to duct air conditioning. Why do we sell them, why do we say we've made room on the roof and not sell solar as part of the base building? It takes a lot of effort. So that's just my response of why we made that decision to go down that path. And I feel it was the right decision because it helped market the building, it helped demonstrate a commitment. It went sort of that extra step beyond what you would see. And I do think we sold pretty fast because people believed us. And that was also kind of very important, frankly, to me in terms of what I develop in the future, to build that trust. So that really helped. And I'll let Travis respond about other more efficient approaches to energy.
Yeah, so in terms of condo sales too, it's actually, Zeina really went on a limb trying to incorporate PV up front. You don't see that very often with condos, and we still don't see that very often with condos. So kudos to her for going through that tangle of fun and excitement to get it done. In terms of community solar here or any other initiatives, we do have Community Choice Electric that the city of Boston has, which is a renewable product that people can sign on to. And currently it's actually you can have 100% renewable energy below the current Eversource or local utility rates, which is great. We also encourage affordable housing projects or any developers that might hold and rent to portfolio their projects together through solar. So they can actually potentially use, a roof area that's available on another project and kind of tie it to other projects. And it's a practice that we heavily encourage. In terms of the overall kind of grid relationship in the city, we're really looking, at ways as more and more electricity comes into play, because we need more, right? That's one of the things that we're doing as carbon reduction is bringing new electricity and encouraging it. So we're looking at ways in which buildings can better interact with the grid, how we can deploy battery storage systems, and really have it so that this pressure that some people feel that the grid might have as it becomes to electrify more gets eased. And we're looking at many ways in which to kind of plan out those relationships through new development projects throughout the city, as well as other infrastructure initiatives that we're teasing out currently.
Gotcha. Yeah, thank you for that. I'm happy to hear that. Now, I'm just curious, from a passive house perspective, how helpful was the PHPP and the primary energy renewable types of calculations in sizing that solar array or PV array? Were you able to utilize that in your design process?
I actually modeled the building in WUFI first.
Okay.
So we kind of use that as our initial baseline to get an understanding of the energy loads. And that actually translated quite well over to PHPP. And we also were just kind of using the predetermined roof area that we had kind of on the upper massing. So we made sure that all the vent stacks were kind of held to the perimeter, did a lot of coordination there. We also made sure the heat pumps were located below so they wouldn't interfere with any roof area. So yeah, that was kind of the initial coordination. We just tried to max it out as best we could, basically.
Right, great, yeah, and I think that's another thing with passive house, right? The ability to downsize any rooftop mechanicals or AHUs to
exactly
provide more space. So we had a bunch of questions, of course, about money and financing, and if you're able to sell for more than the market rate. So with the 3 minutes that we have less here, who wants it?
I can take that. So I think I described sort of the journey, and I'm not sure at a passive house conference people wanted to hear about what it was like to market pre-pandemic, post. But the truth is, you're always going out on a limb when you're part of a group of people who are trying to do things for the first time, something new. So, and I would say to everyone, stick to it. Yes, we certainly covered our costs, and we did set some of the highest pricing in that area, partially because there hadn't been an investment of this quality, and people, there is a market for quality buildings, but they do cost more. And frankly, our product stood out during the pandemic because we had the best air filtration, because we had demonstrated that you're not going to buy into a sick building. And I kind of, as I shared, the solar, people know that it's not beneficial from a tax perspective to a developer to put solar. So it really kind of reaches people. And I think for us industry folks who are really all about our skills and our, professional credentials, it does matter. So what I would say is the market can see this kind of work that folks in this network are doing, and it does reward it. And the reward may not be a huge kind of financial windfall, but it's also, think about it. We sold out during the pandemic in about 2-3 months. We could have sat on that inventory for months. So it's not that you kind of, I just feel like it serves you sometimes in ways that you don't expect. And in our case, it certainly played a role in us having a successful outcome.
Great, yeah, thank you. And I think a key point there is that you were able to sell out during the pandemic in a city, right? Because being in a suburb of New York City here in New Jersey, everybody seemed to be leaving the city at that point. So really happy to hear that. Does with the 1 minute, any comments on financing or anything like that? Or any final words of wisdom?
I think financing, you have to finance a project that's viable. outside of passive house. When you go down the passive house route, you try and share with bankers and appraisers what passive house is about, because certain things like energy efficiency should add to the value of the property. So there's a whole education.
Or did de-risking it have any effect in the availability of funds?
I wouldn't use de-risk as a word, because passive house doesn't de-risk. It makes for a more, robust building, but people don't see it as de-risking it, frankly. So it's because the risk is if the market turns and if everybody leaves the city and you don't sell condos, you sit on an empty building. So I just sort of approach it with a very tempered approach of, it's a great quality building. We had an opportunity to be in a great market, an amazing team of people, and it was a constellation of things that aligned for us. And very happy that we got a passive house building done with all of it. That was sort of the icing on the cake, because it's important to follow your principles and your values when you go out and build something.
Fantastic. Well, unfortunately, we're out of time, unless Travis, you have any parting thoughts. But I do want to thank Zeina and Travis for this, and congratulations on the completion of such an incredible project. And I hope it's the first of many.
Thank you, Sean.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks, everybody.
Have a great day.